life comes from death, like flowers come from buried seeds. This is the wisdom proven in Jesus' death and resurrection, which James says we must live out because it's what we believe. James presents the wisdom of his brother Jesus, a wisdom he first thought was foolishness. For the wisdom of Jesus said, it was the poor who are rich, the hungry who are full. His wisdom said, humiliation should be celebrated. Hardship is a blessing, for through deaths, like a seed in dirt, we would be cultivated. The problem is that the church in James's day was not following Jesus' wisdom. The rich were being honored. Favor went to those with money. Their widows were in need. They overlooked those in poverty. So James, the brother who once thought Jesus' wisdom was foolish, wrote a sermon, a wisdom speech that would teach that life comes from death, like flowers come from buried seeds. For this wisdom was proven in Jesus' death and resurrection, which James says his churches must live out because it's what they believe. One of the places where it seemed the wisdom of Jesus' death and resurrection had not reached was in how the church would treat the poor, orphans, widows, and the least. Those who lead the church offered more prestigious seats to the rich and influential, while the unwanted were told to sit at their feet. But Jesus shows no such partiality. His wisdom says we should all consider ourselves poor, like children, for he has made us rich through faith as heirs of his kingdom. So if Jesus, in his wisdom, counted the poor and outcasts as equal citizens, then his church must do the same, even if it means dying to the wealth their flattery might have gained. For life comes from death, like flowers come from buried seeds. And Jesus would prove this wisdom in his death and resurrection, because it was a wisdom he lived out, not just something he believed. Wisdom isn't knowledge, but understanding put into practice. For you can't love God and love others unless you put that love into action. In fact, James proves this has always been the case, for he talks about Abraham and Rahab in the same way. For it was not a spiritual idea or a religious cliche that moved Abraham to offer up his son. It was the real work of faith. He believed the wisdom of God, that life could come through death's defeat. So in faith, Abraham lived out what he believed. In the same way, it was not an abstract feeling or mental assent that moved Rahab to risk her life to protect the messengers God sent. It was the real work of faith that life could come through death's defeat. So in faith, Rahab lived out what she believed. That is the wisdom of Jesus taught in James, a wisdom that is not just known, but openly obeyed. For if their faith did not work and their life did not love, then their wisdom was from below and not from above. Which is why James warns teachers of wisdom to guard their tongues. For if a teacher's tongue is not bridled by wisdom and love, it will steer a whole congregation off course by what they say. So the sermon of James instructs teachers to use their tongues to lead the church in Jesus' way, that their tongues and teachings needed to be tamed by the wisdom of Jesus and not the world from which they came. They needed tongues that would repeat what Jesus would say, that life comes from death, like flowers come from buried seeds. This is the wisdom of Jesus' death and resurrection, which James says we must live out because it's what we believe. But how did a man like James, who once thought Jesus' wisdom was foolishness, change his mind to believe that life could really come from death? It was because Jesus' faith was like Abraham's and Rahab's. It was not hidden in his mind, but publicly displayed. Jesus' faith worked. His cross was a work of faith. He proved his wisdom true through blood and through pain. His life went to death like a flower comes from a buried seed. Jesus lived out his wisdom because it is what he believed. And because that wisdom is true, because life really does come from death, as flowers really come from buried seeds, Jesus' wisdom was proven true in his death and resurrection, for he rose to live out what he's always believed. That is what changed a man like James, and it's what James hopes could change people like us. That it could change people who trust in the earthly wisdom of wealth and power into people who see them as nothing but lies and foolishness. That we might come to see that life really does come from death, like flowers come from buried seeds. And that we might prove the wisdom of Jesus' death and resurrection as we live out what we believe. Hey everybody, I'm David with Spoken Gospel. Thank you for watching our video introducing the book of James. We are Spoken Gospel. We're a nonprofit ministry and we're dedicated to coming alongside Bible readers like you to explain what you're reading and how it all points to Jesus. And you can join our ministry in two ways. One, come read the Bible with us. We have lots of free resources on the books of the Bible, so come to our website, read the Bible with us. Or two, you can become one of our financial supporters. We are only able to do what we do because of people like you giving one-time gifts or monthly gifts, but you can join us on our website at spokengospel.com.